Appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. On behalf of Marquette University Law School, which is my primary employer today, we just wanted to say how pleased we are to participate in today's event. As many of you know, we are creating a water law curriculum at the law school, which we think will contribute significantly to this region's efforts to establish itself as a global water hub for freshwater research, economic development, and education. Dean touched on this, but I'll lay out the framework for this discussion again. The next hour and 15 minutes should be very interesting. With us today, the three major candidates for governor of the state of Wisconsin. And they're here to talk about the role, what role, if any role, the governor and state government should play in this region's water initiative. The format, as Dean pointed out, will work like this, and I just want to reinforce it. This is not a debate, just so everybody understands. The candidates certainly understand that. Each candidate will have about 10 to 15 minutes to give their views on the appropriate role of government in the water initiative, and then we'll be asking each candidate about 10 to 15 minutes worth of questions, which we hope will reflect your interests, the people who have gathered in this room today. So, bottom line, each candidate has a total of 25 minutes to address the subject. Wendy Hauser from the GMC is in the back of the room with a super soaker gun and is not afraid to use it should people go beyond the 25 minutes. So we'll let Wendy play the role of enforcer. That makes my job a little bit easier. And it appears that we should be wrapping up with this segment at about 1:30 this afternoon. We do know that you want to be on time. We're going to do this in alphabetical order, as Dean pointed out, so we will begin today with the Mayor of Milwaukee and Democratic candidate for governor, Tom Barrett. Mayor Barrett.
Well, thank you, Michael, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk to you about an issue near and dear to my life, which is economic development. But I have to begin with a disclaimer that I've never given before. And that is, last Tuesday I had surgery on my hand, and I was told that I should stay away from work for up to 14 days because, as my occupational therapist described it on several occasions, that I would be cranky and loopy for up to 2 weeks. So I have with me my pain pills, which I haven't taken from this morning, which make me cranky and loopy. And so for the person who's in charge of telling me to be quiet, I'm not sure when you cut me off whether I'll be cranky or loopy, but you're to be warned, it could be one or the other. So this is my first public speaking appearance since then, and I'm just hopeful that I don't say something that ends my career as a result of the medicine that I am now taking. But I do want to talk to you about the Water Council, and I want to talk to you specifically about this region's role in developing water as an industry. And when I say developing water as an industry, it's not something that is overnight. It's something that obviously the history, the economy, the culture of this city is so directly intertwined with our water that it would be a mistake to claim that we are doing something new. But as the song and all that jazz says, everything old is new again. And that's where we are right now, is we have rediscovered what I've always considered our strong suit, which is water, and the importance of water. We've had some notable victories just in the last several weeks with the announcement that the UWM School of Freshwater Science will be moving forward with the addition of AMDS to our community, and I'm very thankful that Bob Keevil is here today. We appreciate everything that you're doing to help create jobs in our community as well. But I want to go back in time. I want to go back in time 5, 6 years. And we would have had a meeting like this to talk about economic growth or economic development in this region. And it would not have been held in this room. It would not have been held in this building. It could have been held in a table or a booth in a restaurant in this community. Because there was very little that was being done at that time to advance economic development in a joint way. And when I became mayor, I thought that that made little sense. And it really was a reflection on my days serving in Congress, where I saw, and I can recall sitting with members of Congress from places like Denver or Seattle or Portland, and they were talking about how their regions were doing well economically. And I, of course, had been a person who had grown up here and really was more used to the fights that were taking place between the city and the suburbs for many, many decades. Fights over water, over housing, over transportation. You name it, the fights continued, and continued. And I felt that in many regards that was self-defeating. That, of course, as a mayor of the city of Milwaukee, I wanted jobs to be located in the city. But I'd much rather have them located in Wauwatosa than in Walla Walla, Washington. Or I'd much rather have them located in Caledonia than Cleveland. And so we reached out, and I reached out to business leaders and urban leaders and suburban leaders and rural leaders, and we developed the Milwaukee 7, the M7 as it became known, to really try to advance this region. And the reason for that, again, was the understanding that leaders, business leaders in particular, really didn't get hung up on specifically what side of 124th Street you were on or what side of County Line Road you were on. They wanted to know whether they could make money in their business. That's what it was all about. And that it was important for us to come together to do that and to really, in a very positive way, promote job growth in this area, to create, retain, and attract jobs to southeastern Wisconsin. And that was the birth of the M7. And there were its detractors. In fact, one of the people you'll hear from later in the day referred to this as putting lipstick on a pig. That was his quote. This is putting lipstick on a pig to try to bring businesses together to try to promote this area. Well, the pig has done pretty well in some regards because we have had some victories. Now, we all know that the national economic downturn has affected this region just as it's affected every region in this country. In fact, if you look over the last year and a half, of the 101 largest metropolitan areas in this country, 100 of them lost jobs. So it's no surprise that we have not been able to escape that in its entirety. But I am here to tell you that without the Milwaukee 7 and the collaborative efforts to try to create and retain jobs, that the situation would have been worse. And I want to use a real-world example because I think it'll tell you both stylistically and, more importantly, substantively, how it's important to have a real-world approach to what we're trying to do. And what I want to talk about specifically is Republic Airlines. And it was a little over a year ago that Brian Bedford, the CEO of Republic, was sitting in my office. And it was shortly after Republic had consummated the deal to purchase Midwest. And he said, well, now that we've consummated this deal, we're going to make some decisions as to where to locate some back office jobs, some mechanics jobs, some customer service jobs. And this is going to be a competition. And obviously, as the mayor of Milwaukee, I said, well, we want to be in the fight. We want to kick at the cat because we want these jobs. And he said, that's fine. You'll have an opportunity. But I just want you to know that you're in competition with Indianapolis and with Denver. And I said, fine. That we understand. We understand. Now, what's important about this is that this was not a magazine that was doing an analysis about the best places to do business. It was not an academic who was preparing a study about the best places to do business. It was, as many of you deal with on a daily basis, it was the real world. It was a real employer comparing real communities to try to find out where to do business and to hire real people. And so it was Denver versus Indianapolis versus Milwaukee. And I will always remember the Indianapolis newspaper article that just dismissed Wisconsin and said, well, this is clearly a competition between Denver and Indianapolis. Well, we put forth, working through the Milwaukee 7, through the M7, we put forth our proposal. It had tax credits that were tied to job creation. Something that I think is an important concept, actually tying the tax credits to job creation. It dealt with the issue of facilities, getting facilities near the airport. It dealt with personnel, getting the right people for the jobs. So last November came, and the announcement was made. Not only would we retain the 800 jobs that we had at that time here in southeastern Wisconsin, but we would gain between 700 and 800 additional jobs. We ran the table. We won, and those other communities lost. Now, I mention that because that would never have happened if you would have had leadership in this community who would take what I call the Hardy Har Har approach to this. Some of you may remember Lippy the Lion in Hardy Har Har. Hardy Har Har was the cartoon character who said, we'll never get there, we'll never get there, we'll never get there. And there are far too many people in this region, and quite honestly, there are far too many people running for public office who love to spend their time saying how terrible things are and how we're never going to get there. And I think all of us realize that if that's our community mindset, if we believe that this is such a terrible community, then you know something? We're never going to get there. But I take my hat off to, and I tip my hat to those people, including the people who are involved in the creation of the Water Council, who are not going to take that defeatist attitude, but who instead recognize that we live in the real world, that this is not an ideological battle, that to the contrary, this is the most pragmatic, practical battle that we can face. And that is, how do we aggressively, proactively do everything we can to promote this region? That, to me, is the ticket to our success. It doesn't mean that we're denying that we have problems, because we know we have problems. Everybody in this room knows that there are economic problems, whether it's at the local level, the county level, the state level, the federal level. But all you have to do is look at Time magazine's cover from 3 weeks ago. And what it had on the cover of that magazine was it had a license plate for a state government. Thank God it wasn't Wisconsin. It was a generic state license plate. And the letters were BNKRPT, bankrupt. And the cover story was how virtually every state, with the exception of North Dakota and Montana, has serious fiscal problems. And we do. The federal government does, the state government does, local governments do. We know that. So the question is, do we fold up our tents and say everything is bad and we're going to accept a lower standard of living for our children and grandchildren in this region? Or are we going to take off our coats and roll up our sleeves and fight like we've never fought before for those jobs? That's the course that I want to take. As a governor of this state, I'm going to do everything I can from day one to be the most proactive and aggressive job that this state has ever seen, to create, retain, and attract jobs. And the reason for that is quite simple. The state of Wisconsin needs more jobs where people can support their families. So let's come back to the Water Council and what I think are the strengths of the Water Council. Again, it plays to our strong suit. Let's face it, the fact that we are here is a tribute to not only this lake, but the rivers that form this beautiful community. And it's not just Milwaukee. You can go to Lake Superior. You can go to the St. Croix River, the Mississippi River, the Fox River, the Wisconsin River, the Chippewa River, the rivers and lakes through this state that really have provided this state with more natural resources than virtually any other state in this country. And there are businesses. There are businesses that need water in their technology. There are businesses that need water for production. I have said, stealing a line from Lee Dreyfus, of course, we don't mind people taking water out of our lake as long as in containers no larger than 16 ounces and it is fermented at the time. But we do have opportunities here. And we have to seize the moment. And the moment is now. The moment at a time when virtually every community in this nation is struggling to get on its feet in a fiscal and economic standpoint. I am convinced that if we continue with a proactive, aggressive approach, that we will emerge from this victorious. It's going to take a lot of work. And anybody who thinks it's not going to take a lot of work is wrong. But I think it's all about attitude. You don't sell a house, you don't sell a car by saying how lousy it is. You just don't do it. You don't sell it. If you're out there trying to sell a dress and you tell the woman it's a nice dress but it makes you a little fat, you think you're going to sell that dress? Of course not. If you're talking to a guy and you're trying to sell him some sporting equipment and say, well, you probably have gotten slower over the year, you're not going to sell him the sporting equipment. And it's not just puffery. It's whether you believe in it or not. And I think we have to have people who believe in this product. And the product we're talking about here in southeastern Wisconsin is obviously the Milwaukee area. But throughout the state of Wisconsin, it's the fact that this is a wonderful place to raise a family. It's a wonderful place to enjoy our natural resources. And for those who think it's a lousy place, well, then I'm sorry they feel that way. Because there are literally millions of people who have never stopped believing in the state of Wisconsin, who have never decided that they're just going to stand by the sidelines and criticize everything that happens. To me, that's not what this is all about. If there's one thing you learn as mayor, is you learn that people don't care. They really don't care whether their garbage is picked up by a Democrat or Republican. They just want their garbage picked up. And you learn that people don't care whether their snow is plowed by a liberal or conservative. You just better make sure you get those roads plowed. It's all about getting things done. And right now, what we need are people like the people in this room who understand that water technology and the Water Council is a way for us to get things done. And what needs to be done is to create jobs. Thank you very much.
We're going to share this microphone now for the question and answer part of it, so step forward when I wrap up with a question. I wanted to begin by asking about priorities here. As governor, where would the water initiative rank in terms of your economic development priorities?
Well, this morning as I got up, and I do every morning, I said to myself, what can I do for the water technology effort today? The first question that comes into my mouth, or comes out of my mouth in the morning is, but in all seriousness, again, it goes back to what I was saying, which is it's a strong suit. It's a strong suit that we have here. And it gives us an opportunity in other parts of this country where they're having legal battles right now over water, for us to make the pitch. That, look, you use water in your production, you should take a look at this community. So I think it's another arrow in our quiver that will allow us to promote ourselves as a place to do business. So high, it ranks high.
Ranks high. Many of us saw the story in the paper this morning about Singapore, and this is one of the competitors for the Milwaukee region. You've got Singapore, you've got Israel. You've got a lot of competition out there. And one of the keys to what Singapore has done, as was pointed out in John Schmidt's article, is that they've had a lot of government investment. And obviously, we cannot match Singapore dollar for dollar in terms of what they're doing for government investment. But my question would be, what can we do in terms of government investment? What can we do in terms of incentives to grow the water initiative?
Well, I think there are 2 points here. One, everybody in this room knows that it's the private sector that creates jobs. That's where our recovery is going to come from, is the private sector creating jobs. You don't want, and the government simply cannot create the jobs that will allow us in a sustainable fashion to move forward economically. So the focus has to be on the private sector and the creation of jobs. Having said that, I think it is appropriate to have a partner because I'm convinced, and we've seen this time and time again, working together that we can get things done. Now, the challenge is that you do not want to stifle the private sector by having too much public involvement. And so you want to make sure that the private sector is doing everything it can. But I think that there is certainly an appropriate role for government to do that. And we have done that. We've done that with a number of companies. We've also tried to look at doing that in the pricing of water as a commodity as well. We are very competitive in our pricing for water, and we think that in the long run that is going to be a benefit to all of us.
You talk about the pricing of water. Perhaps you could give us an update on this notion of wave districts where water is offered at lower costs to firms that will move into a particular area and do business there and create jobs. What's the status of that?
Well, let me give you the concept first. Every local government has, as part of its economic development arsenal, the ability to create tax incremental financing or tax incremental districts, where you take the increment that is created by the improvements to the property and plow that back into the property in some fashion that will allow usually the developer or the business owner to get things going. Again, virtually every community in this country has that tool. Very, very few communities have the tools that we have. And when I say the tools we have, specifically the fresh water. So we have explored with the Public Service Commission, and we had a couple of initial roadblocks, but we continue to work with them to try to find a way to create incentives for companies to locate here that are using water in their production methods. So we're going to continue to work with the Public Service Commission on that.
I want to make sure I phrase this next question properly because it's an interesting concept that's being tried in places like Ohio and Michigan. They have increased the availability of investment capital for entrepreneurs by investing money from, for example, pension funds or giving bonding authority in high-tech, high-growth companies. You could make the argument that water could be one of those industries. And I guess the question would be, how would you support more innovation in water technologies should you be elected governor?
Well, let me begin by echoing what you said about the other states. And one of the things that I've done in this campaign is we've developed an economic development plan. In fact, if you care to see it, it's at our website. And it's a 67-page plan that looks at virtually every aspect of the Wisconsin economy and talks about different recommendations that we're making, that I'm making as a candidate and hopefully as governor of the state, as how to move this state forward. And included in those is a venture capital fund, very similar to the one that Ohio has created, because we understand that venture capital is one of the issues that we face here in the state of Wisconsin, how we can get more venture capital here. It's not just venture capital, but a lot of the startup dollars that we need to get businesses going. We don't have as much of a supply here as they do on the East Coast and the West Coast, for example. And you go to places like Madison, where you've got a tremendous research park and a lot of innovation that's going on there. And you've got the University of Wisconsin that ranks in the top 2, 3, 4 nationally in its NIH dollars that are coming for research. And we have to find ways to take those research dollars. Again, you're at the top of the list in receiving federal research dollars, but we're not at the top of the list in spin-offs from that research, and trying to take all those great research ideas and again, get them to the real world. And so that's one of the things that we're focusing on. With water, I think the same concept applies. I think that it is less intensive in terms of the science, if you will. When you meet some of the scientists in Madison, it is far more complicated. Water is in some ways an easier asset to deal with because we know it so well. But I think that using the venture capital model is a way for us to hook into that as well.
I'm going to wrap things up with a final question. Give us, I guess, some perspective on what you ultimately see this effort being. Is it similar to what we've seen with biotech in this state? What ultimately do you see this being in terms of an asset for the state of Wisconsin?
Well, I've traveled around the state for the last 8 months now, and there are several things that you note as you travel around the state. One is you really do note that people throughout the state, no matter what the economic situations are, they haven't given up. They realize that this is the most difficult economic time that we have faced for many of us in our lifetimes. But they haven't given up on themselves, they haven't given up on their families or their communities, and they certainly haven't given up on the state of Wisconsin, so that they still believe. At the same time, they're frustrated, and in some instances they're scared because of the economic uncertainties that are out there in many parts of the state, in virtually every part of the state. But one of the strengths that the state has, I believe, in the long run, is really the variety of our economy. And you've obviously got Wisconsin as being one of the major, if not major, manufacturing states in the country, along with Indiana, in terms of the percentage of our economy that comes from manufacturing. Agriculture is a huge, huge part of this state's economy, and it's something that we don't think about often enough here in large urban areas. But you get to the northern and western parts of the state in particular, that's the way that people make their living. So you've got agriculture, then you go to Madison, as I mentioned before, with the high tech, the biotech. You can go to the Chippewa Valley, where you've got nanosciences that are flourishing. The Fox Valley obviously has a history of paper making. And then throughout the state, you've got a strong tourism component, which is directly tied to the water as well. But I think here, we do have a special niche that can be created. And many of you have heard me say this before. It also deals with how we define ourselves. And if I have a request for everybody in this room, it's this. I would be the happiest guy in the world if I never hear or read the phrase Rust Belt again. Journalists in attendance, please make that note. And the reason for that is when you think about it, Rust Belt versus Sun Belt. Clearly, Rust Belt connotes a much less favorable picture in your mind. And I think instead of letting someone from a southern state define us, it's time we define ourselves. And I talked before about the venture capital on the East Coast and the West Coast, or even the Gulf Coast. And I think it's time that we talk about America's fresh coast, because that's where we are right now. That is our strong suit. And that allows us, I think, to position ourselves. And it's not just the phrase, it's really how we feel about ourselves. And I think as time goes on, you're going to have more and more parts of this country that are literally going to be parched. And it's going to be regions like this who were smart, who were innovative, who were aggressive, who were proactive. They created markets that allow the water technology fields to grow. And it will position us in a very positive way in the long run.
We'd like to thank Mayor Barrett for taking time to be with us today. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to move things right along. Next in our alphabetical order is former Congressman and current businessman and Republican candidate for governor, Mark Neumann.
My name is Mark Neumann. I'm a conservative running for governor in the state of Wisconsin. I love our state. I see so many great attributes in this state, and it's really exciting to be a part of talking about the future in Wisconsin, a bright future, with a goal and a vision that we become the best place in the world to do business and have the best educated kids in the world. Now, I thought I'd start with just a little bit on background, help you understand a little bit about me, because technology has played such an important role. And when I think of what you're all here for, I think back on some of the experience I've had in the business world. I'm a small business owner, and technology has been so important. And the concept of research and moving your field forward has been so important in our life in a wide variety of areas. I started as a math teacher, and I'm trained to be a math teacher and superintendent of schools ultimately, but the good Lord decided to take us in a little different direction. We started a business in the basement of our home in the early 80s. Started selling real estate and eventually opened an office in Milton, Wisconsin. I learned a very important lesson shortly thereafter. The following year, we started building houses. We built 9 homes our first year. We lost $20,000 plus my salary. And I bring this up because it's an important lesson is that you have to take in more money than you spend if you wish to stay in business. And that applies to everybody in this room. But something else happened that was very, very important, and it's directly related to here. We found out that if we could apply technology to the home building industry, that we would have a leg up on our competition. And as it relates to your industry, if you can provide the most advanced technology in your field, you will have a leg up on your competition as well. Our second year building homes, we built 27 and turned a profit. We had a computer programmer come down from Madison actually to Milton and actually design programs for the home building industry. Now I know this is hard to remember, but back in those days, we literally would have a yellow tablet of paper and we'd be adding up how much we thought we were spending on our houses. So folks, conceptually at that point in time of having a computer programmer come in and write programs that could then be used in the home building industry, it was a very, very novel idea. It was right at the front edge of the technology that was being used at that point in time. We turned the business around with 27 homes the second year. It was about 120 homes a few years later, 250 job opportunities in southeastern Wisconsin. Folks, it is exactly what America is all about. We were living the American dream. I had a beautiful wife. We have 3 beautiful children. Everything was going right in our lives. We made a decision at that point to take a look at our country and where America was going and decided to put our business aside for a very short period of time. When I decided to run for Congress for the first time, the situation in America was the Ross Perot eerie numbers coming across the screen, for those that can remember that. You remember those days when Ross Perot was running those numbers across the screen? He was saying America is dead. Our country is in such a financial mess we can't recover. We had a growing deficit. We had huge debts, and jobs were leaving America by the hundreds of thousands. At that point, they were going to Mexico. Can you all remember that time? Does any of that sound familiar, by the way? Deficits, growing debt, jobs leaving America. Folks, it's a lot of what we're facing today. When I was first elected to Congress, we had the closest congressional race in the country. It was a 22-year Democrat seat that became a Republican at that point, but that wasn't what was important. What was important is that we had a plan to restore America. And the plan went like this. We understood that if we could control government spending, we'd be able to balance the budget. When we balanced the budget, we would be in a position to cut taxes, and if we cut taxes, people would keep more of their own money. Now, if people kept more of their own money, we understood only one of 2 things would happen. They would either spend that money, in which case jobs would be created, or they would save that money, and again, applicable here, it would become the capital that was necessary for our businesses to grow and expand. So conceptually, we went into Congress with the idea, control spending, balance the budget so we can cut taxes, let people keep more of their own money, and it will restore our economy. Well, folks, it was 4 years later. This is the 1998 came out of Congress. The federal budget was balanced for the only time in a generation. We had cut taxes, the biggest tax cut in American history. Some of you can remember when capital gains was at 38%. Well, that was that era that we were bringing that down during those 4 years in Congress. Not to the levels they are. They were brought down one more time in the interim period. But it was the cutting of taxes, it was the balancing of the budget that restored our economy. When I look at government today, those same basic principles have to be applied. And as governor of the state of Wisconsin, our top priority is going to be to get our budget in order so that we can cut taxes, because we understand that, independent of all the rest of the conversation that might go on here today, if we do not become competitive in the United States of America and around the world in terms of cost effectiveness of businesses doing business here, we are not going to be able to attract the best jobs, and your entire effort is going to go away. So when I think about conceptually being governor, top priority, bringing jobs to Wisconsin and restoring our economy, of which you guys are a big part of that. When I think about doing that, folks, the first step has to be make us competitive from a cost perspective for the businesses that may consider coming here. If we don't, everything else is wasted. So when we think about cost competitiveness, I start with taxes. We need to get spending under control, exactly like we did when we were in Washington, D.C. That needs to be repeated. The second thing that needs to happen is education. And this also relates to this industry. Folks, if we can have the best educated kids in the world, we will bring the best businesses to the state of Wisconsin. I've laid out an entire education plan. It specifically addresses education here in Milwaukee. And for those of you that are from the Milwaukee area, you know we have a very difficult situation as it relates to schools here. As a person running for office, so the discussion for education from me is very, very different than everybody else in the races. It's not about power. It's not about control. It's not about politics. When you talk about education, you need to talk about the kids in the classroom and how we can improve the quality of the education so their test scores go up and they qualify to go on to school and have a better life for themselves. Folks, when I think about education, I've studied this carefully. We have 3 choice schools here in Milwaukee that I co-founded, still co-chair of the board. They're providing a quality education at about half the price of the public schools. When I sat down and started running for governor and started looking at this, saying what's going on in public education, we have some really great public schools in the state of Wisconsin, folks, but they cost a bundle to run. The bottom line is our schools spend way too much on bureaucracy and not enough in the classroom educating our kids. So when I lined up these schools side by side, our choice schools here in Milwaukee that are succeeding and the schools that are not succeeding, and the other schools around the state that are doing a great job out there. When we look at how much money is being spent on the bureaucracy that is never getting into the classroom to help our kids, we need to fix that in the state of Wisconsin. We've got a plan to do that. The third leg of getting our economics into house in order to a point where we can attract business to Wisconsin is rules, regulation, and red tape. The time it takes to get a permit out in the state of Wisconsin and the layers of bureaucracy that you have to go through in this state to get anything done when laid up against other states is not acceptable. Now, Tom, I listened to part of his speech, by the way. He had some very good points. I believe in the state of Wisconsin, as he said, but we've got to get our house in order so that we are competitive not only around America, but around the world, because we are competing in a world economy today. So if we want to bring business to Wisconsin, we've got to start with taxes, get them under control, high-quality education, get our rules and regulations to a point where our businesses can afford to be here. Now, that's all stuff that you probably hear most every political candidate talk about. Let me talk specifically to this industry and what we would like to see happen in the state of Wisconsin. I want to start with a reference. Some of you are familiar with North Carolina and the Research Triangle Park that they have in North Carolina. The theory out in North Carolina was this: we have this vast amount of intellectual knowledge on our campuses. If we could match that intellectual knowledge with businesses that could specifically benefit by that knowledge in terms of research and new product development, then we would be in a position to attract lots of business to North Carolina. Now, I know the amount of jobs that they've created out there has been phenomenal. I just saw a report this morning that they've got 110,000 jobs created in the last 5 years in those parks. Folks, this idea, conceptually, of matching the intellectual knowledge that we have on our college campuses to the needs of the businesses as it relates to research and new product development, it works. The model is there. They've demonstrated it. When we talk about the Milwaukee 7, and by the way, we've got those organizations around the state, they're great. As governor, I want to go the next step. I know everyone can't see the whole picture, but you'll get the idea from what's up here. When I tried to apply the North Carolina concept to the state of Wisconsin, we're different in Wisconsin. In North Carolina, they had those 3 universities that were kind of right there in a triangle, relatively close together, that they could then match that intellectual knowledge and the process work. But when you look at Wisconsin, our universities are actually all over the place. Every one of these big circles represents a 4-year institution that we, the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin, are paying some very fine professors with PhDs in all sorts of different topics. The smaller circles that you see on here, those are our 2-year schools. And the stars all over this, that's our tech schools. Folks, we are sitting on such a wealth of knowledge here in this state if we can just figure out how to harness that and put it to work. So here's the plan. In North Carolina, they had one great big research park, and it was located between these. In the state of Wisconsin, what I would like to see us locate at least 10 smaller research parks around the state of Wisconsin. Now, what does that mean in terms of economic development? Well, our economic development team and the Neumann administration, I want to put this as a very strange way to go about things. I'm going to accept applications from business owners and successful business people at all levels of business in different areas around the state of Wisconsin, where those folks will do what Sue and I and our family are doing, and that is put their business aside for a short period of time to serve their state. So our economic development team will be made up of successful folks from around the state of Wisconsin, from the private sector business world. And I'm going to give them two main jobs. Their first job, I want you to go to these other states around the country that are being ranked so good for doing business, Texas and Indiana, states that are growing even in the middle of this recession. And I want you to come back with a very specific list of what they're doing different than what we're doing here in the state of Wisconsin. And I might add, I'm a business owner. I got some pretty good ideas. I understand the taxes, I understand the bureaucracy because we deal with it every day of the week. I have to meet that payroll at the end of the week, and we get it. But the bottom line is I want it specifically identified so as governor, we can change our rules and regulations here in the state of Wisconsin so we become known as the best place in America to do business. That is the vision, that is the goal, and it's where we're going. The second job of our economic development team, and this is very important, I'm going to ask them to go to each one of our colleges and our universities, and private will be invited in this as well, of course, but we're going to ask them to go to our colleges and universities and quantify the intellectual knowledge that is at these campuses. Folks, if it's not done in an organized manner that we know what tools we have available, you're not going to be able to match it to businesses. So economic development team, let's get us on track to be the best place in the world to do business. And now I want to quantify what is it that we have for talent at our campuses? What are our PhDs' emphasis? Where are they best? Where are they strongest? And now we've got entrepreneurs in this economic development team. They understand what the intellectual knowledge is that we have available on our college campuses. Their next job is to match that intellectual knowledge, that strength, to what businesses can best benefit by that, and then we target those businesses specifically. Folks, this is not a passive plan to let things happen. This is an aggressive home builder who has figured out how to survive in one of the worst economies that we've had and even prosper and grow. This is an aggressive private sector person saying, here is our business plan. We know what we're going to do. We're going to quantify that knowledge, match it to business, and we're going out to get those businesses. And the next time I talk to Governor Perry from Texas, he's not going to repeat the conversation I had the last time. It went like this. I was talking to him about being competitive. He said to me, any job we want, we get here in Texas. And I said, well, Governor, why is that? And he started going through things like lower taxes, efficiency in permitting processes, high-quality education for all of those things. And I said, well, you're going to have to compete against Wisconsin. And he laughed at me. He said, no, I don't compete against Wisconsin. I said, why? He said, well, you have to be in the game in order to compete. You guys are not in the game. You're not competitive today. Well, folks, the next time, Governor Perry's going to say, how come those jobs are going from Texas to Wisconsin? Because you guys have done such a good job of restoring your economy. And this is going to be a big part of it, folks. I want you to picture, here in Milwaukee, a research park. And the specialty of that research park is your industry, because you guys are on the cutting edge. We don't want to stay where we are. We don't want other places around to be known as being as good, like us. We want to be known as the best place in the world to do this business, and we want to be known as a place that has figured out how to utilize the intellectual knowledge. And I know you guys are doing some of this. Expect as governor that we step this thing up, and expect that we work very hard, that when we attract the new professors to our colleges and universities, that we are looking specifically for people with talent in the areas that we can grow jobs in. And picture also 2 miles by 2 miles. Not as big as the 2 mile by 8 mile out in North Carolina, but maybe 2 miles by 2 miles, where we are specifically locating new businesses in the state of Wisconsin that are directly related to your industry, where our college professors are assisting in the research and new product development. And one other thing, when we're done with that development, those production jobs are not going elsewhere. They're staying right here in Wisconsin. And I get a little excited about this. I've left out a part that's really important. And by the way, to me, this is probably the most important part of the plan. If you think about a research park here, doing research on water and advancing you to the next level of technology in your field, and you think about the people, the businesses that are in this park partnering with our school, UW-Milwaukee, and the professors at UW-Milwaukee getting grants for what they're doing to provide this research, one other thing happens that's really important. Our Wisconsin kids at UW-Milwaukee are involved in that research as they are completing their degree. And instead of going to Illinois or Indiana or Texas, the most likely place they're going to be employed is right here at home in Wisconsin in that research park. You guys, that's where as governor I think we need to go as a state. It is a specific business plan to get this state from where it is to where we'd like to see it. The vision is clearly we want to be the best place in the world to do business, and we want to have the best educated kids in the world because that's our future. And I'd be happy to take questions.
First, let me check and see if this microphone is working. Good, so you can just remain at the podium there and make things a little bit easier. I asked the mayor about this, and I think it's an important question for this initiative, and that is what, if any role, government should have in investing in this sort of initiative. You've talked about having to get the budget in order. Any governor is going to face some very tough fiscal issues. What do you think is the proper role?
Government does have a role in this. I think government's role is to bring all the players in the game together. And again, I bring the business world experience to this, folks. When we were working on a project any place, we had to bring all the different partners together into the room and sit down and figure out how to make everybody at the table a winner, or at least have them walk out of the room satisfied that they were going to be okay with everything we're doing. I think the government's role is to bring all the players together. As far as money in a business package, we would do a cost-benefit analysis. So if there are going to be jobs brought to the area, we would certainly consider using some of the state-generated revenue from the employees, who of course are going to be paying state taxes. But we would be looking to all of the entities all the way around the horn to be involved in that decision and that process. So in other words, I do not view this as only the state's situation or only the state should be dealing with it. I think the state, the city, the municipality, and potentially other people that are going to be impacted by this should be involved. And by the way, bring in a research park, thinking a 2-mile by 2-mile area where it's dedicated to this. I'm in real estate development. I understand what that means in terms of bringing people to the table. And I think the right role of government is to bring everybody to the table, put together the best package possible. I am not opposed to tax incentives where we've done a cost-benefit analysis and the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin have been taken care of. I would oppose them if we're looking at $1 million of the taxpayers' money for a job created and that type of situation that occasionally you hear about.
I asked that question because of, we mentioned the Singapores of the world, which are doing remarkable things in terms of investment. We can't do that. But the question I think people in this room would have is how far could we go? You're setting limits, aren't you?
Well, I'm setting limits, but I'm also bringing a lot of players into the room. And in business, we found, the key is when you're at an impasse in negotiations, and if you can get more people at the table, everybody has to give a little less to get the job done. That principle, that applies to what you're talking about. I am not, again, I would reiterate, I'm not opposed to tax incentives with a cost-benefit analysis done, but I would be opposed, there are limits on it. I would not spend $1 million of taxpayers' money to bring a single job to the state of Wisconsin. That I wouldn't do. The TIF districts, I know the mayor mentioned those. I'm very familiar with TIF districts. I'm not opposed to looking at the tax revenue generated by the new construction in a district and reapplying some of that back to get the business located here.
How would you sell other companies around the country who might be involved in water technology businesses? How would you sell them on coming to Wisconsin at this moment in time?
How would I sell them on coming to Wisconsin?
Yeah, this would be a good place for them to do business.
You start with what we have here, folks. We have the best state in the country. I had somebody say to me, well, what about someplace down south or where the weather's better? And I said, well, we got our 4 seasons. I mean, we got our lakes and our trees and our resources here. I can't imagine a place anywhere in the world better to raise a family than the state of Wisconsin. I would start there. I would next go to education, because I think when you're talking to a business owner who has family and their employees have family, they're interested in the quality of education. And I go there next because I think it's really important that we are on this track to have the best educated kids in the world. Education is a very important component of my platform. That's kind of atypical for Republicans. But I'm just going to tell you that if we apply what I would call conservative principles to education, we're going to be able to document that our kids are in fact the best educated kids in the world. We've done some things in Wisconsin that are not smart. We test our kids with a Wisconsin written test, no ability to compare our kids to other kids around the country because there aren't any standardized norms. I'd switch out of that to tests that we have national norms, and I would want to be able to demonstrate that in fact we have the best educated kids in the world. The next thing I would do is demonstrate that we are on course to become the most cost-effective and the best place in the world to do business. Folks, this concept of having private sector business people sitting on an economic development team as a business owner, that all by itself is very encouraging to me. But if we can get the plan in place, what we're going to do the first day I'm in office when we convene that meeting and get them started, if business owners from around the country can see that we are in fact on track to make this happen in Wisconsin, we're going to become a much more desirable place right away. I love this state, but we've got to get ourselves to a position where we can compete in the business world. And it's absolutely essential in your industry like so many others.
Give me a sense of your conversations with people about the Emerging Water Technology Initiative. What are they telling you that they need from you if you're elected governor?
The experience that I have actually with water is probably different than any of the other candidates, and what I actually hear about water and water technology is probably significantly different than the others. I actually had to put a well in that cost us, not that I remember the number, it was about $1,248,000 down 1,000 feet to protect the aquifer of the lesser aquifers. So it was a rural subdivision where normally they put the wells in on each house as you go along. We went down that deep in order to protect the aquifers. We hear a lot of discussions about the availability of water and the ability to transport water from this area out to the Waukesha and past west area. So my experience with it probably comes more from that than anything else, and I can tell you that the research that you all are involved in, the advancement of your industry, is extremely important.
Final question. Give us an idea. You talked a lot about the research triangles idea. How long would it take you to get that off the ground and have it running in a way that might make a difference to, for example, this emerging sector?
There are two things that are necessary to restore the economy in the state of Wisconsin. One of them is what I've already shown you. The second thing that we need, and you've hit the nail on the head, how long, and you know what, I get asked this everywhere we go, how long does it take to get this up and running? I would expect to see jobs, I would expect to see inside of 6 months that we're locating areas and the first thing you got to do is quantify what you've got and match that to the business. But I would think we're in discussions within 6 months. I am not a passive patient person. I believe very strongly in terms of moving forward rapidly, and in business we do not tolerate taking too long to get a job done. Certainly in the first year you should expect to start seeing defined plans and matches of business, and you should start seeing businesses announcing they're coming here.
All right.
So,
former Congressman Mark Neumann, current candidate, Republican candidate for governor, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it. It's good to see you again. Thank you. We're going to move forward now with our program. Our third and final guest, the third major candidate running for governor in the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee County Executive and Republican candidate for governor, Scott Walker. Mr. County Exec.
Welcome. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years now, the fourth summit of this sort. It's good to see the crowd keep growing and the interest keep growing, and it's an honor to be here, not just today as the county executive, but obviously as a candidate who'd love to be your next governor. It's interesting thinking about the topics, and I just caught a little bit of the last minute or so there. You know, we talk a lot these days going around the state. Earlier this year, I was literally over the top of another body of water. I was at the Monona Terrace in our state's capital on Business Day and laid out a plan to get this state working again. And it's based on 6 different things. I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of that because water and infrastructure are part of that. But to tell you that the plan that we laid out, I'm very much one of those kind of guys that likes to have firm goals and then even clear objectives of how we get there. And I like to put numbers to it. Some folks remember when 8 years ago I first ran, I laid out, had 500,000 cards printed up that said, here are the things I'm going to do as your next county executive, and literally dared people to put it up on the refrigerator. And the good news is I bump into people every once in a while who tell me, you're still up on my refrigerator because you actually did all the things you said you were going to do. And in our case, this is what we'd like to do for the state of Wisconsin. 6 simple things that I believe will help the people of this state, not the government, but the people of this state create 250,000 new jobs by the end of our first term. That's 250,000 jobs by 2015. And it's simple. It's a variety of different things, everything from cutting taxes on individuals, on employers, capping off property taxes, even things as simple as phasing out state taxes and retirement income, which you might say, what does that have to do with jobs? Anybody who's been to the airport the week after Christmas knows the next wave of people going down to Florida and Arizona and Texas and Tennessee aren't just going to get away from the weather climate, they're going away to get away from the tax climate. And that's money that when we talk about startups and angel investors and venture capital that's being invested in places like Tampa and Sedona and Naples and other places outside of the state of Wisconsin that we need to keep here. So one objective is to cut taxes, because I think you look at the states, and I just heard Mark allude to a couple, Texas, Indiana, and others that have done that, have lowered the cost of doing business. Those are the states, even in these tough economic times, have actually seen job growth, and in turn, actually their state budget's doing better than states like Wisconsin. Secondly, I talked about cutting through the regulatory issues in this state. easing through the red tape that comes from regulations, particularly for small and mid-sized employers, adding in things that are science-based in terms of the regulations that we do have, science-based and predictable, with the idea being that if you take out a permit for something, it shouldn't take you 2 days one time, 2 weeks the next time, and 2 months the time after that. It should be predictable. Just like everywhere else in life, things are predictable. It should be in government as well. Third, we talked about cutting through the cost of litigation in this state, cutting through the red tape of frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits. Again, if you look at the states, even in the past couple years since the economic woes started in 2008 in earnest, the states that have passed true tort reform, that have eased the regulatory burden while still maintaining public safety and public health standards, and have made it easier to do business by a lower tax burden, those are the states that have seen economic growth. On top of that, I want to have a world-class education system in this state. I think there are ways to do that. I certainly know there are thousands of reasons to be for that. I have two. They're called Matt and Alex, my two sons who go to Wauwatosa East High School. And I know in this room for every parent or grandparent, anybody who just cares about kids, we know how vital it is to have a world-class education system. But to get there, we can't just be confident with the status quo. We've got to continue to have advancements, not only here in Milwaukee, obviously an economic hub across the state, but all throughout the state of Wisconsin. As governor, I'd like us, for every school district, for every administrator, and most importantly for every teacher, to create a system in the state where we pay for performance. Where for those classrooms where the teachers perform well and the students perform well accordingly, we pay them accordingly and we give them incentives and benefits. And for those that don't, we provide mentors to provide them additional assistance. And for those that continue not to reach those standards, we find others to take their place. Everywhere else in life, any of you in business and marketing and retail know you pay for performance. To me, we should be doing the same when it comes to education. And when it comes to higher education, we should be supporting particularly our individual University of Wisconsin campuses, not just on a system-wide basis, but as I go from campus to campus, one of the common themes and issues that comes up is campuses that would like autonomy. They'd like to be part of the University of Wisconsin, they'd like to be part of the state of Wisconsin, but they know that certain parts of the state have unique needs and interests, and they'd like to be able to account and accustom for those and to make things that fit into, whether it's the M7 or the New North or any other place across the state, fit into the economic strategies of that given region and not be bogged down by the administrative overhead, not just in the system, but in the state government itself. They could do more and operate more like many of you do in the private sector and business if given the opportunity to do that. As governor, I'd like to advance that as well. We also talk a lot about health care, but not about the way they're talking about in Washington, where they talk about access and quality. In Wisconsin, we rank nearly at the top when it comes to access and quality. Our big challenge in this state, more than anything else, is cost. The cost of providing access to quality health care for our employers. And as governor, I'd like to get away from the mandates that come out of Washington and some even these days that come out of Madison, and instead open the door for more market-driven solutions, things that allow true transparency and disclosure, so when you're making purchasing decisions about health care, you've got a place to go and a place to understand what you're buying into. Entities that allow the government to partner with the private sector to open the door for sharing the risk, the pool of risk out there through purchasing pools, and ultimately things even as simple as eliminating the state tax and health savings accounts to give employers one more option to provide affordable health care opportunities for themselves and ultimately their employees. And then the final thing I talk about in any group, but I particularly want to highlight today and talk a little bit more in depth, is infrastructure. For me, we need to have reliable infrastructure in the state to fuel the state's economy. It's everything from cost-effective and variety of sources of power that are cost-effective and reliable in this state. It certainly means a transportation system that is up to date and moves into the 21st century and beyond. It talks about telecommunications, particularly in some of our most impoverished and rural parts of the state of Wisconsin. But one of the other things I mentioned in front of other groups, not just the Water Council Summit here today, is water. We need only look in this region to know the power, not just through this summit and through the various academic institutions and employers that we have, but just the debate and discussion about providing water to our friends and neighbors to the west in Waukesha County, and the balance between that, between protecting our incredible natural resource, but at the same time doing it in a way that might be able to aid and assist the economy of this region. We know how important it is for water, and it was great to see that story today in the Journal-Sentinel, kind of as a prelude to this today, talking about, $425 billion industry looking to triple over the next decade worldwide when it comes to water infrastructure, and for us to be at the forefront of having great leaders amongst us who saw the vision through the M7 and through the leadership of Rich and Paul and others stepping up, and now Dean coming from the Spirit of Milwaukee, taking on the Spirit of Water and the new logo and everything else, but taking on that challenge to say we can be at the forefront of that. And what I really see in that is in a number of key categories. Certainly you look at proximity, not only our proximity to Lake Michigan, but here in the state of Wisconsin. You know, we're the only state surrounded by 2 Great Lakes and the greatest river in the U.S. We're filled with 15,000 inland lakes. That's 5,000 more than Minnesota. Eat your heart out, Brett Favre. When you look at what we have in this state, it's phenomenal. And when you look at our core industries, over the past 162 years of our state's history, it's been manufacturing, it's been agriculture, and it's been tourism. Each of those 3 industries heavily depend on water. But manufacturing, really over the years, over most of our history in the state, has been about water in the process of manufacturing something. Not as being the product, but being as a means to get to a product. We have the ability to step that up, not only here in the region, but to export something that is incredibly powerful. At a time when we talk and complain nationally a lot about things, jobs being exported, we have an opportunity to export an economic benefit that the talent and skills that we have here, and I want to highlight a couple different areas, and forgive me, for some reason they signal around P's. There's nothing more than it just was consistent. But the first up is what would I do in the future to promote the water industry here and in the state of Wisconsin? First off is to make it a priority. You know, in the Department of Commerce in the state of Wisconsin, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of employees. There are all sorts of specialists in things like timber, dairy, manufacturing. There's nothing when it comes specifically to water technology. As governor, I'd like to reorganize through our Secretary of Commerce, the Department of Commerce, so that water technology, water we're talking about today, becomes a part of our economic development strategy for the state of Wisconsin, not just for this region, and that there will be staff actually assigned specialists, just like we do for timber and dairy and every other area. We should make that a priority. That's one of the easiest things we can do right off the bat. Certainly, I look onto that and say, in addition, we need to protect. That means we need to protect the fact that our proximity, whether it's to Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, our lakes, our rivers, and others. So it's obvious things like I think something we can all agree on, protecting and making sure, in light of all the talk these days about the golf course, that we maintain the ban on any sort of drilling, oil or otherwise related, anywhere around or in the Great Lakes. It certainly means looking on things like working with state and provincial leaders to make sure that we address things like ballast water discharges, not on a state-by-state basis, but on a bi-national agreement, so that we tap it at the very end by the St. Lawrence Seaway and not when users are coming in and through the Seaway and the Great Lakes itself. Making sure we address the Asian carp issue. I know that continues to grow and it's timely, and hopefully much of that will be addressed even before there's a new governor. But certainly that's a priority for us who value the Great Lakes. Looking at phosphorus and the issue that so many local governments have in dealing with that, the new phosphorus mandates that are in place, but looking at balancing that. Just the other day was at CH2ML Hill, and I just saw a couple of guys here. We were talking about about how do you balance that out, helping local governments with, and even here in the MMSD and others to a smaller extent in terms of the size, but balancing that mandate when it comes to phosphorus, but in the same way of not bankrupting them. To me, there's a company here in Evansville I visited that's one of the largest producers of prairie grass, and looking at ideas that might seem old but are new in terms of prairie grass and prairie restoration around areas where water runs off, and helping that be a natural filter in addition to all the other technologies we're advancing. Certainly you look at all those things are things that are needed to protect. I would add just a couple other quick things before I get the hook back there, because I'm watching my count off here. Pushing research. You know, we've got the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, obviously right here, that's been at the forefront of the Water Institute, but that's been largely focused on ecological research. We need to go beyond that, and obviously with the new focus that so many of you have been a part of in terms of the School of Freshwater Sciences, a key component. As governor, I will make that a priority for us to move that forward. Just as county executive, I push the school engineering, which I think keys into that as well. Whether it's Marquette with water law, whether it's University of Wisconsin Whitewater, or Parkside with each of their individual programs, we're going to continue to push for research. I look at profit and say that whether it's the wave concept, the TIF idea you heard talked about, I heard the tail end about a little bit before, I think that makes abundant sense. If water is an interesting way to attract and retain business, and certainly a key way, just as we do with TIF districts. I would add to that means we need to have water utilities like the one here in Milwaukee and others that keep rates reasonable. I think the rate last fall when I contacted in September the PSC on behalf of any number of employers and businesses throughout southeastern Wisconsin about saying the utility rate charges that the city of Milwaukee's utility was pushing were too high and too aggressive. We need to make sure that that's not a barrier, and certainly as governor in the areas that we control, we're going to act on that. We look at other issues in terms of even things like applying similar standards to what we do voluntarily for Energy Star, having similar standards in place in terms of the efficient use of water technology and being a leader in terms of that. And then finally, just promote. You know, certainly it's what you're doing here today, being a part of the M7, the regional economic development component here, but as governor, it's going to be one of those key things. Again, you think about manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. We need somebody who's going to be a key advocate in promoting those core industries, but also looking to expand those that become a part of that. As governor, it's not something I'm just going to come to once a year at a water summit, but something that through our Department of Commerce, through our investments in our university system, through our efforts to seek to preserve our natural resources, we're going to continue to push in multifaceted ways to help promote this very powerful thing that will help us not only protect and preserve these great assets we have that are part of our water base, but also use them to help us create more jobs here in the great state of Wisconsin. So with that, I think I got done before the last hook. Mike, I'll let you turn it over to what you got to do.
Thank you very much. I'd like you to go a little bit further. You talked about saying that the water initiative is a priority. We can say it's a priority, but how would you demonstrate that through action? What specific actions are you talking about doing that would demonstrate that that's a priority for Scott Walker administration?
Well, I think certainly when you look at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, much as I did with the School of Engineering and stepping forward to make sure that site was secured at the county grounds, I would do the same thing through the UW system in making sure the School of Freshwater Sciences not only gets located, but the funding that they need to move that forward. I think specifically I alluded to in the Department of Commerce, having that a part of the statewide strategy and actually dedicating staff that specifically are wrapped around working with the leaders here in the Water Council and others, the multitude of businesses that are already here and those that have expanded even in the past 3 years since the Water Council started up. I think making those sorts of investments, even in a tough economic time, it's about establishing priorities, and we've got so much growth potential here. We've got to rearrange the things we currently have in the state to put a greater focus on this emerging industry and technology base we have here.
What about the notion, and we talked about this earlier, I think with Mayor Barrett, this notion of a Wisconsin Venture Fund, something like what they've been doing in Ohio. Could something like that be appropriate for the Water Technology Initiative?
Absolutely. Ohio, Indiana, I've been down with my friend Mitch Daniels talking about this in the past. I think they've got another good model down there. I, without a doubt, would be supportive of that not only for this, but for a multitude of other medical and other ecological-related technologies. The other thing I would add to that, beyond being for that, which I'm assuming each of the other two speakers spoke favorably of as well, I would highlight the fact I mentioned earlier. It may seem off tangent, but I think it's directly linked. When you talk about changing the tax climate for retirement income in the state, one of the largest barriers to venture capital, to angel investors, is the tax climate for retirement income. It's why so many of our angel investors from the past are sitting down there in Fort Myers and Bonita Springs and Tampa and Naples and Sedona and other places. If we were just to slightly change that, I'd love to ultimately completely remove that, but even phasing that over time would send a tremendous message to those individuals who've already left, but more importantly to those who may be teetering about leaving, about staying here. And as you all know, for venture capital, angel investors not only like to invest where they're at, they like to tinker. They like to be involved. They may not want to be involved 9 to 5 every day of the week, but they want to be involved in the business plan and the emerging technology and helping many of these startups. You want to have those investments made where people have their money invested. And unfortunately, too much of our money is invested in other financial markets than here in Milwaukee and particularly southeastern Wisconsin. That, to me, would be one part, along with the fund, of bringing that more back to Wisconsin.
I asked this question of Mark Neumann, but I think it's an appropriate question. Both you and Mark Neumann have been critical of the business climate in the state as it exists today. Taxes too high, you're saying, spending not under control. The question I have is, what would be your message to people who are currently doing business here and are thinking about expanding their businesses or taking them elsewhere, or to business people who are outside this area? What would you tell them to convince them to come to a state that you're not convinced is doing the right things in terms of the economy right now?
As of today, the first thing I'd tell you, come November 2nd, help's on the way, because you're going to have a leader in the next governor of the state of Wisconsin who understands that the best way to help business get moving forward is to get government out of the way so you can do more business in this state. Specific to water technology, though, I tell you there are 3 advantages to come here, even with those climates that are going to change. The other issues I talked about that will change when I'm the governor of the state of Wisconsin. But right now, today, and they'll only get better in the future, is proximity. Not only proximity to Lake Michigan, but here in this state, like I said, we're the only state in the union surrounded by 2 Great Lakes and the greatest river out there. I don't think you can overestimate the impact of that. We already see it in the value, whether it's this port, the Port of Green Bay, the twin ports up in Superior and Duluth. We see that from a shipping standpoint. It's even more true when you talk about freshwater research technology and business development. Secondly, we have an abundance, and with this Water Council, we've seen it growing exponentially, an abundance of companies that either are primarily or largely connected to the water technology and emerging businesses. And third, we have a great academic base here. Not only with UWM and the School of Freshwater Sciences, but when you think about Whitewater, Parkside, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, when you think about already the things we've done to partner even beyond water technologies in terms of MSOE and Marquette and UWM and all the other academic institutions in this area, we have an established track record. In fact, we just had, I think it was yesterday or the day before, it was announced even in other areas, a joint venture in terms of grants coming together. We have a track record of working together. The M7 has accelerated that, and if you want to do business related to water in this state, and particularly in this region, proximity, employers, and higher education are the key components to make that grow. We've got them all right here. We've got the great synergy to make it work in the future.
We've been talking a lot about business, academia. Another part of this initiative involves water conservation. Mm-hmm. Do you have specific ideas on what this region could be doing in order to fulfill the aspirations of those who think we need to be using less?
Well, I think certainly one of the things I alluded to before, when you look at the voluntary standards we have for utilities and appliances, which I think have been very aggressive and are good for retailers. In fact, if you go to the store, most people now, whether you go to Sears or anywhere else, are looking for those sorts of standards in terms of energy usage because they know not only is it ecologically powerful, the bottom line, it's not only economically sustainable, it's financially sustainable. If you save money by saving energy cost off of those appliances, those sorts of voluntary standards are very appropriate. I think we could be at the forefront of establishing similar standards and guidelines when it comes to water usage, whether it's specific devices or in terms of organizational or corporate uses of that. I think to the extent that we could help set that standard, and it's certainly something that I think our support of the university system here in this state and our support through the Department of Commerce could be aid in assisting this emerging group of businesses here in the Water Council in southeastern Wisconsin.
So at the end of the day, 5 years out, 10 years from now, what do you see this effort being analogous to? What does it look like in your vision of the future? What does the Water Initiative look like 5, 10 years out?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you see, it's not the same topic area, but you look at here in southeastern Wisconsin, particularly here in Milwaukee County, completely different issues, so I'm not connecting the two on this, but you look at Bucyrus and P&H and Joy Global, they're 2 of the world's largest providers of those sorts of equipment anywhere in the world, and we're at the forefront of that because we had great leaders, particularly guys like Tim Sullivan, who moved forward and reinvested more into that establishment here in Milwaukee County, particularly in South Milwaukee, and put us at the forefront of really being the leader in his industry and have brought more of those jobs in from elsewhere. I think we can be a leader when it comes to water technology and particularly water infrastructure in terms of not only the work that we do here, but the impact it has on developing companies all across the world who are going to look to us, hopefully, in terms of being the industry leaders to help them not only put in water management systems, but ultimately conservation and fresh water and even quality water attainment as well.
You're convinced this region can play on the same field as Singapore, Israel, places like that?
To me, I'm less worried about competition than laying on the table what we have to offer. I think if you laid it out there, what we have in terms of those 3 key components, proximity to fresh water supplies, looking at the abundance of water-related businesses and the growing number, and the fact that we've got a great academic base concentrated in a relatively small region, I think those 3 things are great strengths for us. As long as we push those forward, There's going to be, if you look at the world and the emerging countries that are out there, even a couple of those other metropolitan areas that you mentioned, there's going to be more than enough work for us to do when it comes to this topic, that it's not all or nothing when it comes to other competitors out there. We just need to be at the forefront of saying to other countries, to other regions, to other businesses, we're the place you want to turn to as one of the key places in the world when it comes to water.
Milwaukee County Executive, Republican candidate for Governor, Scott Walker. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Thank you.